Chapter 8 What It Takes to Be a Hero. September 15th, 2006. Tokyo Narita International Airport, Japan. My first impression of Japan is that it was a crowded place. Crowded with people who all seemed to be going in one direction. On that Friday morning when I landed in Narita, the airport was jam-packed with people trying to leave the country. They boarded planes bound for Korea, America, Australia, the Philippines, Ecuador, and even Brazil. Whole families were pulling up routes and doing whatever they could to leave. I could feel the fear in the air. People knew there was a war coming. I wasn't alone in the airport. My dad and several high-ranking members of the Japanese government had planned this vacation for me. A handful of Secret Service agents, including Gutman, were with me. But once we set foot in Japan, Gutman's team had no more authority, and they passed me off to the people waiting for me. A tall man, flanked by bodyguards of his own, was waiting in the terminal, holding up a simple sign that read, "Blake Robinson." He was a skinny man in his upper 20s or mid-30s and had very wiry hair. I almost panicked when Agent Gutman said, "All right, sir, we'll leave you with him." "Wait," I said, "I don't speak Japanese." "Your escort speaks English," Agent Gutman said. "He'll be your interpreter." My escort turned out to be a member of the Japanese government. His bodyguards took up positions around the both of us as he led me out of the airport. "My name is Ryo Nakagawa," the man introduced himself. "His Imperial Highness, the Prince Ryobe, asked me to deliver you to his daughter." "Am I going straight to see her?" I asked hopefully. No, Ryo replied in a friendly tone. "Why not?" We stepped out of the airport and found a limousine parked and running. A bodyguard opened the rear door for us, and we stepped inside. "Well, as much as the Princess Asami wants to see you," Ryo said, we need to wait for the jet lag to wear off first." I sat down in the cushy car seat. "Jet lag?" I asked. What's that?" I was distracted by how comfortable this seat was in comparison to the plane. I hadn't been able to sleep on the Trans-Pacific flight, and now I suddenly felt the urge to catch up on all that time I could have had my eyes closed. I don't remember the drive away from the airport. I just barely made it to the hotel, and I'm pretty sure I passed out before I actually hit the bed. The next day, I woke up to the sensation of someone poking me in the back while 3 people whispered to one another in Japanese. I did not understand a word they were saying, but years later, my wife confirmed to me that this is what she and her siblings were saying. "He's dead," Prince Akio murmured. "He looks totally dead." "Maybe he was poisoned," Princess Akeno proposed. "Look how he drooled all over the place." "Ew, gross," Princess Asami burst out. "Why'd you say that?" "Because that's better than the alternative," Akeno said. "Do you really want to date a guy who drools in his sleep?" "We're not dating." Asami got defensive. "Who said we were dating?" "Like everyone on Earth except for you," Akeno snarked. That was when I came back to life, in a manner of speaking. "Who's there?" I groaned, trying to turn over and sit up. Asami threw her arms around me and bear-hugged me so hard we both fell back onto the bed. When she spoke, she switched from Japanese to English much more smoothly than when we first met. "Blake, I'm so happy to see you," she squealed. "I was so scared. I heard about the shooting and I thought—" "Dude, she thought you were dead until you called us," Akio cut in. "That was the longest 5 hours of our lives." "Sorry I didn't call sooner," I said. "A lot was going on." "Speaking of that," Akio said, "you really need to tell us the full story. What happened after the shooting? We only know the stuff they showed on the news." Standing up and stretching, I brought Asami and her siblings up to speed on the situation of my dad's attempted assassination. Almost immediately after he opened fire, the shooter was dive-tackled by several members of the Secret Service and the Arlington police. He was arrested and taken into custody while my family and Agent Walsh went to the hospital. The gunman's name was Kyle Bradshaw. He was from Los Angeles, California. Under interrogation by the FBI, he quickly revealed that he wanted to impress an ex-girlfriend who was attracted to criminals. He figured killing my dad would instantly make him the most notorious criminal in the United States. "You got that right," Akio interrupted. "We saw the video of those protesters calling for him to get the death penalty." Kyle refused to give away any information about his ex-girlfriend. He tried to protect her, but the FBI had their own methods, and within half an hour they had her full name, address, and contact information. California police broke down the door to Irani Sandbrook's apartment and found that Kyle was telling the truth about her attraction to bad people. Irani herself was missing. Neighbors said she left home about a week before the shooting and never returned. In fact, Irani Sandbrook would never be seen again. The FBI offered a massive reward for any information that could lead to her discovery, but nothing ever came. Eventually, law enforcement and prosecutors alike began to suspect that Kyle had actually murdered Irani, a claim he was still passionately denying in court when I left the U.S. to visit Japan. Of course, over half a century later, we now know the full story. Akira Robinson shed her disguise as soon as its usefulness ran out. She returned to the Archangel and started time-traveling toward the next historical event she intended to alter. Asami, Akio, and Akeno paid close attention to my story until I caught them up to the present day. When I finished, Princess Akeno shook her head in disbelief. "Oh, that poor Sandbrook girl is most definitely dead. Bradshaw probably stuffed her in a suitcase and buried her in the Nevada desert." "You watch too much crime TV," Akio chided her. "Anyway, now that you're here, Blake, are you ready to get started? Our ride is down in the lobby." "A ride?" I replied. "Ride to what?" Akio strode to the other side of my hotel room and threw open the window blinds. "The very heart of Japan," he declared. Out the window was the largest city I'd ever seen in my life. At least, it was the largest city I've ever seen on Earth. A gargantuan metropolis sprawled across the land, seeming to go on until it touched the horizon, where a great snow-capped mountain loomed large. The high-rise buildings were so numerous and densely packed that it was impossible to see any streets below. Even when I put my nose to the window and looked down, I could see that there were several buildings between my hotel and the nearest street. "We got to see your nation's capital," Akio finished. "It's only fair you get to see ours, too." September 16th, 2006. The National Diet, Tokyo Prefecture. Before we could go anywhere, we had to check in with our guide and chaperone, Ryo Nakagawa. As it turns out, his place of work was right at the center of the city, in a region Akeno called the Government Center. Just like in Washington, this section of Tokyo was nothing but government facilities. At least, that's the impression I got. When we got in the limousine provided for us and the driver took us away, the first thing I noticed was that I couldn't read any of the road signs. This simple detail is far more disorienting than you might think. I could only tell we'd reached the government center when I spotted people on the sidewalks dressed up in the same kind of business outfits I saw in Washington all the time. The government center caught me off guard. Having lived in Washington for just over a year by then, I'd gotten used to the layout of America's political core. Most of the government buildings in Washington are spaced out from each other. For instance, the White House is about 2 miles away from the U.S. Capitol. The Pentagon is on the other side of the Potomac River and is best reached via helicopter. If you want to go anywhere in Washington, you need a car, at minimum. Japan did things differently. The Capitol Building, Supreme Court, and the official residence of the Prime Minister were all within 400 yards of each other. The Imperial Palace was nearby, on the other side of a moat, just close enough to be seen from every government building. Clearly, this capital district was designed to allow lawmakers to walk from one government building to another. In the back of the limo, Asami, Akeno, and Akio all laughed at me as I rapidly moved from one window to the other, desperate to see everything. Finally, our limousine came to a stop in front of a large building with 2 office wings on either side. "This is our stop," one of our bodyguards said. "The National Diet. One moment, please." The bodyguard pulled out a flip phone, dialed a number, and then spoke in Japanese to someone on the other end. After a few minutes of waiting, Ryo Nakagawa, dressed in a casual business suit, stepped out of the Diet building to meet us. As soon as he got inside the limo, the driver accelerated, and we were on the road again. "Mr. Robinson," Ryo began, "your father told me that you have not seen your friends in some time, and that you needed a chance to rest and relax following your ordeal in Arlington. To that end, I've built an itinerary I think you'll enjoy very much." "Okay," I said. "What have you got in mind?" Ryo opened his notebook and peered at something he'd written down earlier. "I understand that over the summer, you convinced Her Imperial Highness Asami to start watching an American television show called Star Trek, and that you are now both fans of the show. Is that right?" Asami and her brother both jumped with excitement. "We love that show," they said together. I reached over and gave them both a hug. Akeno snorted in a haughty way. "It's okay, I guess." "Driver," Ryo called forward, "the show starts in 1 hour. Get us there with time to spare." New Sano Hotel, Minato Ward. Ryo talked our ears off the whole trip, telling us about the place we were going. The New Sano Hotel was a historic place. "Just like the Watergate in your capital," Ryo bragged to me. "Every nation should have a historic hotel in its capital to attract visitors." According to him, the Sano Hotel was once the headquarters for a group of rebel soldiers who tried to overthrow the Japanese government back in the 1920s. Nowadays, it was under the control of the United States Army. "Wait a minute," I interrupted. "How does our army control a building in your country?" "The United States and Japan have had a military relationship for the past 60 years, Ryo informed me. "American soldiers have been in Japan ever since your nation clashed with ours in the Pacific War." When we arrived, the New Sano Hotel was decorated as though there was a 4th of July party going on. American flags flew high and proud from the roof, while red, white, and blue banners were strung up from windows and railings and tree trunks. They all had the same 3 letters branded across them. USO. "Hey, Blake, what does USO stand for?" Asami asked, pronouncing each letter slowly. "I thought your country was called USA." "Yeah, I don't know what that is," I admitted. The limo parked in the hotel's underground garage, and Ryo led the 4 of us upstairs. The New Sano Hotel was absolutely crawling with American soldiers. Military men, officers, and enlisted alike parted to let us past. Several of them recognized me and raised their arms in salute, saying some kind of greeting as I went by. "Good to see you, kid. Hope that Secret Service lady's okay." "Semper Fi, Robinson." "Tell the First Lady the state of Virginia loves her." Finally, Ryo steered the 4 of us toward an auditorium. The doors had a banner containing the letters USO across them. Inside, the letters also appeared on the curtain at the back of the stage. Most of the seats were already taken by soldiers, but a row near the front was reserved for special guests. And that's where Ryo took us. Akio, Asami, and I chatted amongst ourselves for several minutes, still trying to figure out what Star Trek had to do with any of this. We got our answer quickly enough. "Soldiers of U.S. Forces Japan," an announcer's voice said. For 60 years, the United Service Organizations have brought a little slice of home to our brave men and women who have given up so much to keep our nation safe. As we've done for decades, we'd like to give you a chance to see what the entertainment industry back home has cooked up, so that you won't be out of the loop when it comes time for you to finally return to your families and friends. Now let's move on to today's entertainment. The USO is proud to present... I didn't hear the rest of the announcer's words, because at that moment a very familiar piece of music began to play. Asami, Akio, and I all jumped in our seats and cheered as the Star Trek theme began to fill the auditorium, and 7 very familiar people came onto the stage. Tragically, no record of this USO show seems to have survived to the year 2084. And my wife, her brother, and myself are, as far as we can tell, the only 3 people in that room who are still alive today. So I have to tell this part of the story entirely from our own memories. If the reader sees fit to question the reliability of the recollections of 3 old people, then that is their prerogative, but this is roughly how we remember things went. 7 actors from the Star Trek franchise bounded onto the stage and received a very warm welcome from the crowd of soldiers. There were 5 men and 2 women, dressed in casual everyday clothes, but it was still possible to recognize which characters they played on the show. Asami even said as much, pointing to one of the actors and saying, "Wait, doesn't that guy play an alien or something? It's hard to tell without the makeup." "I think so," I replied. "I recognize his voice." The actors took it in turn to thank the U.S. soldiers for their service to America, and then launched into one of the funniest shows I've ever seen. They started out by trying to promote new episodes of Star Trek that were going to be released this year, but as soon as one of the actors told a joke, they got sidetracked and never got back on topic. Each actor told a story about some strange, unusual, or amusing experience they had while filming the show. At first, things started off innocently enough. One actor confessed that whenever he messed up a line, he would immediately commit himself to making some sort of joke out of the mistake. Others admitted that they just couldn't keep it together when stuff on set broke, intentionally or otherwise, and things broke on set rather frequently. "Doors were our biggest problem," one actor said. "It's supposed to be the future, and all of those automatic sliding doors were supposed to be everywhere. And it's really just some guy with a button, and sometimes he screwed up. Of course, we're all so used to doors opening right away that we just plow right into them and they don't. I've walked into so many of those damn things, I'm surprised my nose isn't flat." Then, things got raunchy. The cast revealed that the women who appeared on Star Trek were under pressure to be sexy to attract male viewers. When they said this, I could hear all of the soldiers sitting forward in their seats, their interest piqued. I'm pretty sure Akio did the same. The actresses shared stories about how they each ended up wearing a skin-tight catsuit at one point or another, and then doing some kind of activity that involved either acrobatics or just bending over a lot in front of the camera. They even used a screen projector to play some clips from the show that were particularly eye-catching. I have to confess that even I was hooked. Years later, Asami said she saw me drooling. She's definitely right. Meanwhile, Ryo Nakagawa was sitting near us, getting redder and redder in the face, as he realized just what he'd brought 4 teenagers to see. I'm pretty sure he covered his face in his hands when the actresses started talking in great detail about some of the more revealing outfits they wore in the show, and how certain sex scenes found their way into the final cut. Prince Akio and I started making a list of episodes our parents didn't allow us to watch. He knew of a video store nearby that carried Star Trek shows on DVD, and we were very excited to see these titillating moments for ourselves. By the time the show was over, I think the temperature in the auditorium went up at least 10 degrees. Everyone was far more excited than at the beginning, and all of the soldiers seemed to have a good time. Even Akeno, who wasn't a Star Trek fan, had a blast, though she enjoyed just watching the reactions of her siblings, Rio and myself. Rio and his bodyguards tried to shoo us out of the room as quickly as possible without causing a scene, but it wasn't to be. "Hey Robinson, wait up!" For the rest of my childhood, all 4 months of it, I would never forget the moment when a Star Trek actor called me by my name. Looking around, I saw it was the one and only black man who acted on the show. With a big smile, he took my hand and shook it firmly. "I just wanted to say hello personally," he said. "I was really sorry to hear about the shooting in Arlington. It's good to see you're okay." I started to thank him, but the actor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small blue envelope. "I know it might be too much to ask," he said. "I was just going to put it in a mailbox and send it the old-fashioned way. But could you give this to the Secret Service lady who took a bullet for you? It would mean a lot." I hesitated. "Huh? What is it?" "It's a get-well-soon card." The actor actually blushed up a tiny bit. "Plus a little money as a donation. Kathleen Walsh kind of made herself into one of my new personal heroes, you know. A lot of people think she's a hero, actually." As I took the card from the actor, Asami said, "So, how exactly did she become a hero anyway? All she did was get shot." The actor was far more patient with Asami than I expected. I guess the question coming from a kid seems more innocent and less rude than if it was a grown-up speaking. "Well, put it this way," the actor said. "That jerk was trying to shoot President Robinson. If he got his way, he might have shot the First Lady too. Maybe even Blake and Jacqueline. He didn't want to waste his bullets on the agents, but Walsh stepped out there in front of him, knowing the whole time she was going to get shot. That's what it takes to be a hero, kid. To do what it takes to protect your friends and family, even if it means you have to take a hit or worse. Walsh didn't know if she was going to live or die, and she did the right thing anyway. A lot of us wish we had that kind of courage, you know?" Those words hung in our minds for the whole day afterwards, and we had plenty of time to think about them too. After the USO show, a very embarrassed Ryo hurried us back to the limo, and we were on the road again. He had a short conversation with Asami before saying something to the driver in Japanese. I think that's enough of the city for now," Rio told me, flustered. "Her Highness suggests we give you a chance to see Japan's natural beauty." Akeno, Asami, Akio, and I spent the next 2 hours chatting excitedly about the show we watched, not really noticing how the view out our windows changed while the limo snaked its way out of Tokyo, traveling west. Mizugatsuka Park, Yamanashi Prefecture. Our voices were starting to get sore as the limo finally came to a stop. Akio looked out through the window and said, "Oh, this is why you said we needed sturdy shoes today." "We're not going far," Rio said. "Just far enough to get a good view." I peered out of my window and gasped. We were at the bottom of Mount Fuji. The tallest mountain in all of Japan loomed before us. When we got out of the limo, I was surprised to see that the parking lot where we stopped was full of cars and people dressed in heavy coats, with backpacks and winter boots on. Many of them were heading towards a trail that led up the mountainside before disappearing into a thick forest. "But it's like 5:30 in the evening," I said, checking the time on my flip phone. "Shouldn't people be leaving?" Rio, Akio, Akeno, and Asami all shook their heads. "This is the most sacred place in our country," Akio explained. "Sometimes people climb Fujiyama at night so they can stand on the summit and watch the sun rise." "This is the land of the rising sun, you know," Akeno reminded me. "We get the first sunlight before anyone else each day, and if you're on top of Fujiyama, you'll get to see the morning light before anyone else in Japan, let alone on Earth. But I think Nakagawa's being generous. bringing us here to see that." She pointed to my left. I turned to face west. Mount Fuji was to our north. The distant horizon was stained blood red as the sun descended toward the horizon. Looking back towards the mountain itself, we could see a couple of clearings in the forest where people had stopped their ascent to watch the sunset. "Hey, there's a better view up here," Asami squeaked. Before I could say or do anything, Asami grabbed the sleeve of my jacket and quite literally dragged me up the trail. Akio and Akeno just stood by and laughed at the sight of their little sister pulling me along. "Come on, keep up," Asami scolded me, all the while dragging me up the mountain path with enough energy to power a skyscraper. Rio and his bodyguards struggled to keep up with us youngsters as we scrambled our way up the trail. Asami and I arrived in a clearing where a series of rocky boulders prevented the growth of trees. The two of us clambered on top of one of the big rocks before turning our eyes to the west. Akio, Akeno, Rio, and his bodyguards all caught up with us, and their jaws fell open at the sight of the vista before them. "That's something you won't see in Tokyo. It's beautiful," Asami breathed. Later on, I found out that we were roughly 4,000 feet above sea level, and some 8,000 feet below Fuji's summit. The view from here, less than halfway up the mountain, was absolutely breathtaking. All I could see was the densely forested mountain terrain and the sun sinking towards the horizon, turning the whole world into a blazing mix of orange and red and yellow. "Once we receive the sun, we send it on to the rest of the world," Asami said. "It's the middle of the night in America now, isn't it?" "Oh, yeah, it definitely is," I said. After a year of correspondence via phone and email with Asami, I was getting very good at recognizing the time difference between Tokyo and Washington. If it was going on 6 in the evening here, then it would have been just past midnight back home. For a few minutes, we just watched the sunset, until a great commotion caught our attention and we looked around. A 7-year-old girl, dressed up in winter clothing, had lost her footing and fallen down the trail. About 200 yards away, a pair of adults were racing down the mountainside trying to reach her. "Oh no," Akeno said. "She must have been running down the trail. Everyone knows that's dangerous." "That girl doesn't," Akio commented. The small child sat up, grabbed her ankle, and began to cry. Asami immediately sprang to her feet, ran to where the girl had fell, and swept her up. I followed behind her, keeping an eye on the approaching parents. Asami sat down on a tree stump and tried to soothe the girl. "You're okay," Asami said in Japanese. "You're going to be fine. See? It's not that bad." Then she hissed at me in English. "Say something before you scare her." "She won't understand me," I said. "Say it anyway." I knelt down beside Asami and the girl, patted the child on the head, and said, Don't worry. Your parents are coming. Everything will be okay soon." The girl finally stopped sobbing. Her green eyes flicked back and forth between myself and Asami, as though she was taking in every detail of our faces. Meanwhile, Ryo Nakagawa told one of his bodyguards to wrap up the girl's ankle. The man complied, producing a roll of medical tape from one of his many pockets. Pulling off the child's right boot, the man quickly confirmed the girl had sprained her right ankle and started to create a makeshift splint. I looked around and spotted the girl's parents. They were much closer now, only a few paces away, but they seemed to have frozen in place, unwilling to come any closer. The father called out in Japanese, and Asami saw the confused look on my face. "Hang on, I've got this," she replied in English, then called out to the parents in her own language. She waved her arm again, imploring the parents to come near. Rio did the same, and the pair finally approached. There were many words exchanged in Japanese, and I knew there was no way I could even hope to keep up with the conversation. I just kept a passive expression on my face and slowly nodded to pretend I was following along. Finally, Rio's bodyguards returned the little girl to her parents, her injured ankle bandaged up and made secure. Even though her eyes were full of tears, the child kept her eyes locked on Asami and I as her parents gave her a warm hug. "Please be careful from now on," Asami said in Japanese. "You only have 2 legs. You wouldn't want to lose them, would you?" Then both the father and mother faced Princess Asami and bowed so low their bodies were bent at a 90-degree angle. The mother nudged her daughter with one hand, prompting the child to do the same thing. Then all 3 family members said the same thing in Japanese. Asami responded with some kind-sounding words, and finally, the family left. By then, the sun had gone down and it was getting dark very quickly. Rio insisted we all return to the limo. I would be dropped off at the hotel in Tokyo. Asami and her siblings would return to their home in the Imperial Palace, and then we'd have another adventurous day tomorrow. Once we were all piled in and driving away, Asami burst out laughing. "You know, Blake, you scared the crap out of those people when they saw you." "What?" My voice cracked. "How? I didn't do anything." "You existed," Asami snorted with laughter. "Most people here have never seen a black person, let alone be close enough to hear their voice. That little kid's gonna remember you for as long as she lives." We laughed about this all the way to Tokyo. Decades later, after she retired from the Stormbreakers and the United Nations military, Tsubaki Endo will still tell the story of how she met me and my wife on the slopes of Mount Fuji to anyone who will sit still long enough to listen.